Hello, everyone, and welcome to Gay Men Going Deeper, a podcast by the Gay Men's Brotherhood where we talk about personal development, mental health, and sexuality. Today, I'm your host. My name is Michael DiOrio. I am a life and wellness coach specializing in sexuality, relationships, and self-confidence. And today, I am super excited to be facilitating a panel discussion about being gay and Asian. Even if you do not identify as such, I encourage you, I implore you to stick around for this conversation. I promise you'll get an immense amount of value from this discussion. Some of the things we'll be covering today are, and since we haven't had the discussion yet, I'm not quite sure where it will go, but I'm sure we'll cover these things. How your ethnicity influences your experience as a gay man. We'll be shining a light on stereotypes and discrimination in the gay community. And we'll explore how we can become better allies in supporting marginalized members of the community. This is an episode I've been wanting to do for a very, very, very long time. And I'm very thankful that to be joined today by these three fabulous and insightful guests, my panelists. I will introduce them briefly here, and then they'll have a chance to speak more to themselves in just a sec. So we have JP Fernandez. He is an award-winning diversity, equity, inclusion, and reconciliation specialist with experience in the private, public, and nonprofit sectors. Aldwin Era is an elementary school French teacher, dog daddy, amateur tennis and pickleball player, retired drag queen, and world traveler. And finally, we have Jared Bruce Lee. He is the CEO and founder of the Daring Academy, where he helps gay men build their self-confidence and bodies from the inside out through fitness, nutrition, mindset, and healing work. All right, thank you guys so much for joining. I am excited to start this. And before we jump into the panel discussion, really this episode is about you guys. So I just want to say something quickly at the beginning, and then I'll get into facilitation mode here. So I said earlier that I wanted to do this episode for a long time, and it is really important to me because I think the concept of intersectionality is extremely important in our community and not talked about enough, I think. And we do have a lot in common as LGBTQ plus people, yes. But we have to remember that our experiences do differ based on things like race, cultural background, age, religion, socioeconomic status, where you live, or gender identity, and so on. So a lot of these factors completely change our experience of being gay in this community. So the word intersectionality is really about acknowledging how various aspects of someone's identity intersect and interact with each other. And so today, that focus is at the intersection of gay and Asian. Okay, so let's jump in. First, let's give the audience a chance to get to know our wonderful panelists. So I'll give you guys just a few minutes to talk about yourselves. And we'll start with JP.
Thanks, Michael. Hey, folks. Such a pleasure to be here. Michael, thanks for having us. I feel like I'm excited to have this conversation with these two wonderful individuals. I am a first-generation South Asian man. I was actually born in India and migrated here with my family when I was 2 years old. So it's interesting being a first-generation Canadian, but yet not having the same immigrant experience that most people do, given I came here so young. Growing up South Asian in a predominantly white community was really interesting. And then coming out queer specifically added a few more layers to that. But certainly, created a unique experience that I think a lot of folks probably resonate with. In terms of who I am in my professional, personal life, I live downtown Toronto. I work in the equity space. I have done a lot of that work in the nonprofit sector, really trying to make sure I understand my own identity and how it intersects with the work that I do and other people's experience. Really, I think a big part of the work that I do is about listening, hearing people's stories, and using that to support individuals to success. And I'm really proud of being able to do that work. It's a gift, it's a grace. But I'm really happy to have this conversation with you all today. So thanks for having me, Michael.
Yay, thank you, JB. And do you identify as queer or gay, or either one?
I think I interchange between the two.
Okay.
I feel like more recently I've really been saying queer a lot. I think that really resonates with me the most.
Okay, cool. Good to know. Thanks, JP. All right, Aldwin, over to you.
Hi guys, my name is Alden Era. Hi JP, hi Jared, nice to see you guys. Hi Michael. a little bit about me. Just like JP, I'm first generation. I was born in the Philippines. And I think it's important to share as part of my story that I was born to a father that was a pro basketball player in the Philippines. So, he had a lot of dreams for me, like hoop Michael Jordan dreams for me. But, I came out of the womb with like high heels on. So that was, a huge surprise for him. Similar to JP, I moved to Canada when I was 7. So, in a predominantly white neighborhood. So that's also kind of an important factor. Um, Currently, I'm a primary school teacher, and I find that for myself, being gay and Asian, particularly as a teacher in the Toronto Catholic School Board, is a can pose a bit of a predicament. But just being authentic and who I am, and presenting myself as who I am with my kids, I think is important, especially in terms of visibility, which I know we're going to talk about on today's show. And I think that after all, the only thing that you can really truly be is just yourself. And that's kind of the best gift that you can present to the world. So that's a bit about me.
Beautiful. Thank you, Aldwin. All right, Jared.
Yeah, hi. So I'm Jared Brisley. I'm super excited to be here, and having this conversation is really bringing up a lot of different feelings inside my heart. But I grew up I was born in Taipei, Taiwan, and my family immigrated to Auckland, New Zealand when I was 4. And there were so many different experiences, whether before even realizing I was gay, being in childhood, at school, um, different, whether it was outright racism or just kind of more not in your face. But a lot of those experiences that have, I didn't learn to heal them or to even look at them. I just shoved that away, and I believed that as truth for such a long time until I was probably mid-20s was when I really started to own every part of myself. So I'm just excited to have this conversation and shine light and hear your stories, JP, Aldwin, and see what impact we can do here.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you, Jared. All right, thanks, guys. That's great. Good start. So the first thing I want to talk about on this episode is specifically about discrimination. So we'll start with JP for the first question. And can you speak to any specific challenges around discrimination that you faced within the gay community due specifically to being Asian?
Yes.
Tell us.
Yes.
Tell us all about it.
I think it's important. I mean, to start things off, I think it's important to maybe situate myself because I feel like, this is my experience, and it's not everyone's experience. And I think I sit with a lot of privilege, given, as I mentioned, that despite being first generation, came here quite young. And so I don't have an accent. I do dress and look sort of Western presenting. I understand Western references, which is, a lot of privilege that I feel like I embody. I come from a middle-class family. Those are all things that give me privilege and being able to navigate these spaces that I think are really important to note. But yeah, I think discrimination has been really real for me. I think it starts off in like youth, when you're young and you're sort of trying to understand who you are. And I grew up, as mentioned, in a predominantly white neighborhood. And so it began there, it began this experience of, oh, you smell like curry, and, go back to your country, these sorts of things that sort of come up. And I remember when I came out a little bit late. I was 26, and I was really excited. I thought I was going to go into the village, and it was going to be like, welcome, newbie, come on. And that wasn't my experience, unfortunately, right? A lot of it was, oh, I'm not into brown guys. And it was often quite direct, and no filter. And, I think at that time, it was very much not taboo to say those types of things or put those types of things on people's profiles. And so that was the introduction. I remember, early on in those years, there was a local magazine that used to do an annual sex survey. And one year they thought it was brilliant to put most attractive race. And South Asian sat right at the bottom of that list. And I remember laughing about it because I thought, what else can I do? But it doesn't sting any less, right? And so I think, that experience of just having people ask really dumb questions like, oh, so you must be a vegetarian, or you must be Hindu, or Muslim, or what's your real name? Why did your parents give you that name? It doesn't resonate, or it doesn't, align with your culture. I think are things that were a really big part of my experience. And I think the biggest piece there is it starts to become internalized. And so you start to believe some of those as truths, and that you're lesser valued, or you're less worth. And I remember going to spaces where, there's a lot of white men, and feeling like I needed to prove myself, feeling like I needed to be validated in order to belong in that space. And that's really hard to do when you're coming into a space already not winning, already not belonging. And that was really, really hard. It still is. I think I still struggle with that on some level, and have to really check myself and check my thoughts and check how I show up for myself in those spaces. But it is quite real. I think it's changing. I think there certainly is a lot more awareness. I think people have the language to identify it now, but I think where there is still room is in how people embrace that information, internalize it for themselves, and then put it back out into the world. I think people know how to talk about it. I don't think people know how to action it quite yet. And so those are the pieces that I think, like, that's been my experience so far. Again, through my own lens, I think there's folks that probably have a very different experience, but that's where it sits for me.
Yeah, thanks, JP. We'll talk about some of that actioning later. But I want to end with that, and for our viewers and listeners, question for you. I just thought of this, and I'll ask this to both of you guys after as well. How was it coming out to your family? How did they handle it?
Yeah. So not easy. My family's very Catholic, like very Catholic. And so I don't think they knew what to do with it, right? I think, and they still don't know what to do with it. I came out, I remember I had to go see a bishop. He told me I was going to hell. There was a whole slew of wonderful experiences that followed that. But I think what it did for me was allow me to really sit back and understand who I was, and reconcile that with my faith and my community before I came out to them, right? So I had to do a lot of work internally, so that with that experience of coming out to them, I knew it was going to be hard. It was hard. But because of all that work, I think it was almost a blessing. I think I have a deeper understanding of myself that I probably wouldn't have had if I just sort of like came out. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing. And the reason I asked that question is because when I've worked with clients who are coming out and they are of a different race, doesn't matter which one it is, but that's always one of the things we have to consider is like, what are the cultural values? If there's religious values, like that has a big part to play. It's easy to say, oh, we should all come out, but sometimes it's actually not safe to do so. And you want to do that very carefully. Thank you, JP. Alton, is there anything that you'd want to add about specific challenges you faced in the gay community?
Yeah, I think in kind of like a converse effect, like there's the whole idea of being fetishized. So very similar to JP, you have this experience as an immigrant, and like, just to share a little story, when I was in elementary school, like my mom wanted to pack me Filipino food. She's your mom, she cooks food for the weekend, she wants to pack you your regular Filipino food. And so like I remember one day on a Monday, I opened my food, and I opened my lunchbox, and a classmate was like, "What is that smell? Like that smells so gross." And I remember from that point forward, I asked my mom, like, "Can you please never ever pack me Filipino food again? Like I just want Lunchables. Like I just want bologna and cheese and crackers because I wanted to fit in." And like talking about intersectionality, it's like that whole like, I'm going to discard who I am. I'm going to discard my cultural identity because I want to fit in with what everyone else is having. And typically everyone else is white, right? So, talking about like just discarding your cultural identity, like that started for me at a very young age. But going back to the whole idea of fetishizing, when I was growing up and I was trying to form my sexual identity as a gay man, a lot of the things that were presented on television, like, does anyone remember the show Queer as Folk?
Yes.
So Queer as Folk was a huge, it was huge for me because it was the first gay show, the first show that I saw on television that depicted what gay men did and what gay men's lives look like. And, when that is really one of the only kind of, reference points for, a 13, 14-year-old boy, you start to adopt and like create your identity based on this perception of what this show is presenting. So I would skip school like at 15 and 16, go down to the village. Here in Toronto, we used to have what we were called the steps, the second cup steps, where you would just sit down and you would cruise. And oftentimes, there would be these guys that would come and pick me up. And I didn't know it at the time, but they're, very opposite to the whole kind of, survey that JP was talking about, where Southeast Asian men were kind of ranked at the very bottom. There's also this group of gay men that fetishize, Asian men, but they don't look at us like human beings. They look at us as objects. And so, I guess it has to do with like, Western culture and dominating, Eastern culture and all of that. So I, from a very young age, understood that to some degree, I'm just an object. I'm just to be used. I'm not to be looked at as a human being. And it's because of this whole kind of fetishizing perception that I experienced as a teenager.
Aldwin, can you tell the audience who might not know that word what that means? Fetishize?
I mean, from my understanding, I think it's when you have and maybe, Jared and JP can help me with the definition of this, but you have this idea, like, I guess in the context of my example, there were white men that looked at Asian men and only that particular trait and honed in on that. And because I presented as Asian, that was the only reason why they had any interest in me. So, I mean, that's kind of my experience.
Like it takes the humanity out of it.
Right.
Like the fullness of you, right? Yeah.
Right.
All right. Thank you, Aldwin. Jared, over to you. What discrimination have you faced in the community?
Yeah, this everything JP out on you guys are saying, I can resonate with. There's a few things that started, right? So starting from school at a young age, like you, JP, I came here when I was 4, 5. So, I learned, I was laughed at my accent at the time. I didn't know the language, but very quickly, being at that age, I picked it up. I still remember being age 9, and there's a group of boys and all white, and me wanting to be a part of this group. And it was only until I think I had because I looked different, I didn't belong. It wasn't until one day when I had brought this bubble gum to school, and one of the boys was like, "Hey, what is that?" And I gave one of those pieces to him. And then I was like, "Oh, this is amazing." And I shared it with other guys. And then suddenly I was part of this group. Became friends with these guys. But what I noticed, all these different experiences and being laughed at for food as well. My mum would bring these Chinese food and people would say, "Oh, that smells gross. That's disgusting." And I'd come home like, "Mum, I hate this food." I didn't. It's just because I didn't belong. So I was like, "Hey, I hate this food. Bring me, why can't I have what everyone else is having?" And I remember starting from that age, right? There's this feeling of the more I can sound white, the more I can morph myself to fit in, the better I was. And when people said to me things like, "Hey, Jared, you're like different from the other Asian kids," I was like, "Yes, I'm like winning. I'm winning here." Only until later, I'm like, "No, that's bullshit. That's not winning." But at that age, that's all I knew. And then starting from the dating thing, I started pretty young. I was 16. I went online dating. All those experiences started. Where there was blatantly on dating profiles, this is called New Zealand dating, it's like not into Asians, all that sort of stuff. Sending messages, not getting anything back. I'm sure that's can happen to everyone, but sometimes it's just, "Hey, not into Asians," and it's straight into your face there. And I remember all that combined, right? I wanted so much just to make myself different, make myself better. Um, Even the fitness side of things, Michael had this whole discussion before, right, about the fitness and getting in better shape in my early 20s changed the dating scene for me, but ultimately didn't feel good. Or be guys saying, hey, like, you're pretty hot for an Asian. Like, like, hey, well, you are, but like, you're Asian? Oh, yeah, I don't usually date Asians. I'm not into. And that's at the moment when I was early 20s, right? Low self-esteem, that was great. It's like, hey, this is a massive confidence boost because I'm better. But that's bullshit again, bullshit. Um, it was only until later on I started to, yeah, actually, this is we'll talk about that later, but uncover and just heal all that stuff that does not belong. So this is why I'm so grateful to be here and have this conversation, because all that subconscious stuff that just seeps in, is still there, and you just gotta like deload. It doesn't just disappear.
Yeah, I really do empathize with what Jared is sharing. I think that when you're, a person of Asian descent, particularly in the gay culture, and again, I know we're gonna talk about this, but the whole idea of visibility, I remember very similar to Jared, like guys wouldn't even look at me just because I was Asian. Guys wouldn't even, I would walk into a bar and I would be with a bunch of my white friends and they would get all of the quote unquote attention and I would just be kind of like, the funny friend that was hanging out with the rest of the guys, right? And it's such a shame that we as gay Asian men we feel like we have to do things like go to the gym and
Mm.
fit a physical standard just so that we can be looked at. And so I really did, that resonated with me a lot, Jared, that, we feel like we have to overcompensate because we don't even have our foot in the door. And that can be extremely frustrating. I know it's not a lot of gay Asian men's experiences, but it definitely has been mine. And I know it has been a lot of my other gay Asian male friends.
You guys have all talked a little bit about this concept of being like the only Asian kid in like a greater group of white friends, right? And I think a lot of that has to do with representation, which is what I want to talk about next. I think it's a really good segue because, I mean, growing up, on Queer as Folk, good example, Aldwin. Also for me, that was kind of my first imagery of gay men on television. And then further after that, Will and Grace. As far as I recall, there were no people of color at all on either of those shows. What are your thoughts on the representation of gay Asian men in the media and culture? We spoke about it a bit in the past, so definitely speak more to that. And then what about now in 2024?
Yeah, I guess in preparation for this podcast, because I'm being Filipino, I'm more interested in like what the representation for Filipino men look like, gay Filipino men in the media has been. I remember there was an actor named Alec Mapa. He had a bunch of small roles in like Ugly Betty. I think he was in Will and Grace. And I remember seeing him on TV as a teenager. I'm like, that guy's gay and he's Filipino. And I thought that was so cool, just to have someone that looked like me be, have reached this level of being kind of broadcast across television screens across the world, which was really, really cool, and I mean, other than him, I don't remember a lot of gay Asian men taking kind of like a center stage role on television. I know, like, in shows like RuPaul's Drag Race, because Filipino guys love to do drag, like gay Filipino guys love to do drag, there have been a few, personalities on RuPaul's Drag Race. But I mean, I think today, if there's any kind of indication that there's been more visibility and more representation, there was a movie that came out 2 years ago called Fire Island. Joel Kim Booster, he's a screenwriter, Bowen Yang, who's on SNL. It was predominantly like all like most of the primary characters were gay and Asian, and I thought that that was really cool. And to set it in Fire Island, which is, it's like a party destination for a lot of gay men in the summer in New York, like to have it there and kind of like reclaim that and have gay Asian men as the central figures in this story, I think is really cool. And I think we need to have more of that representation, to be honest.
Yeah, I completely agree. We've talked about that on lots of different ways, not just with race, but just body types and age and everything in the gay community. Um, JP, curious to know for you on this topic, do you think that that lack of representation in those, earlier days when we were first coming out, uh, influenced and impacted the fact that maybe white guys or other guys thought, no Asians, not attracted to Asian guys, not into Asian guys? Do you think there's a link there?
Oh, absolutely. I think, I don't think we can pretend as though our desires and what we are drawn to is solely influenced by our own thoughts. I think there's a clear correlation between what's put out in the world versus what we're drawn to. Um, I think an important part of this conversation, though, Asian is a broad term and it has a multiplicity of identities. And I say that because my experience has been when people are talking about Asian, they're often referring to East Asian and not South Asian. And so, you know, there's a really important distinction there, because when you're talking about representation, again, we're often talking about representation of East Asian folks. Like, I can't really think of anyone who's South Asian in media. I mean, there's Dev Patel, and I remember there was a guy that I had met, and he thought it was a great idea to call me Dev Patel for a good year and a half because that was the only South Asian person he knew. And I think, there needs to be there needs to be a broader understanding of what representation looks like. Because as Alden mentioned, there aren't a lot of Filipino Asian men in media. There aren't a lot of, Thai Asian men in media. Like, you know what I mean? When you start breaking it down, that sort of distinction and representation really, really matters. So yeah, I think, yes, representation matters. I think the way that we're depicted, even when we are represented, is also really important. Like, if you think about how South Asian men are often represented in movies and TV, it's the newcomer. It's the guy that wobbles his head. It's the guy with the accent that sort of does funny things. It's not often a Western version of a South Asian man. And so there's almost a mockery of what it means to be South Asian. Um, so yeah, I think we need to evolve that a little bit.
Yeah, very well said. Thank you so much for making that point about that Asian is a very broad term. You are but three very awesome people that are sharing your experiences. I love that. And I think what this does is it gives people a chance to hear diverse perspectives, which is the whole point of this. But yes, JP makes a very good point that not everyone's experience is the same, even just as Asian men. Clearly, as we can see here, see and hear here, your experiences have been different. And that applies to everyone. Everyone's experience is unique. But I hope, though, that we can find some commonality. And I hope that some of what you guys are sharing here helps to validate and make others feel a little bit more seen and heard. Yeah. Jared, do you want to add anything on the topic of visibility and representation?
Yeah, totally hear what you're saying there, JP. It is there's Korean, Thai, South, there's Indian, there's so many different Asian. When I was younger, in social media representation, absolutely. I was called Jackie Chan, or funny enough, Bruce Lee. Those are the things like, Jackie Chan, Kung Fu, because that's what that was all on TV at the time. And what I'm noticing, there is a tide is, there's definitely changes. Growing up now is very different too. If we're growing up in the, 10 years, 20 years ago, 20 years ago. But there needs to be more. A big part of my driving force, I feel, at some stage when I turned that corner in my mid-20s was, how can we make more different types of Asian men be seen in a desirable light, but not as in a fetishized way, but just like, hey, yeah, like Asian men are fit, they're sexy, they're hot, and that's like awesome. And the more we can do that with all across the board, right? And not with some wobblehead Kung Fu being the main thing, then it's going to create, being a young 5, 6, 7 year old, you get easily influenced. If you can see someone go, oh, wow, this guy's awesome. I want to be like him. That gives you something to like, yeah, I'm excited for. And if I had that when I was younger, I believe, can't say for certain, I probably wouldn't have tried so hard to shove away that being an Asian, being my ethnicity.
I was just gonna ask. I know, Jared, you just said like, we need more gay Asian men other than like, Jackie Chan and Kung Fu. But wasn't there recently a Marvel movie that came out where what's the name of that actor? Do you guys remember? He's like a
Simu?
yes, Silu, is that his name?
I don't know the exact pronunciation. Yeah.
Okay, forgive me if I
Simu.
butcher his name, but I
Yeah,
think that that's
me
cool,
too.
right? Like that is so cool that the central figure in a multi-million dollar, you know, movie chain decided to cast an Asian actor as their Marvel hero. Like that is really cool.
Mm, mm. Yeah, absolutely.
Do you guys think that we are, I mean, I personally think that we're improving on that, but I'm curious to know if you agree, if it's improving, and if it's improving at a pace that you think is fast enough or there's enough happening.
I mean, I think the dials, I think the door's open for the conversation, is what I think it is. When we're talking about representation in media, let's not pretend like film studios and these companies are really concerned about what representation looks like. They're more interested in bottom line and what's going to drive sales and money, right? Like I think that is what is driving these conversations. And I think about like, these big brands that really sort of push diversity. Like you think of some of these like makeup brands who are like, love your body, love your skin, love your identity. And yet those are the same companies that are in Asia selling skin whitening creams, right? And so I think when it comes down to it, money is what drives this. But also, so I think there's a responsibility on us as consumers to demand more change. But as I said, I think the door is open for the conversation in a way that it hasn't been before. And so there's an opportunity. I don't know that I see it moving forward exponentially, but I see the opportunity for the conversation.
Yeah. And I see you, JP, and this is very much what you do in your professional life. So thank you for sharing. Okay, guys, I want to flip it a bit and personalize it a bit. So yes, we're talking about being gay and Asian, but at the end of the day, we're also talking about our culture here, right? So for our viewers and listeners listening to this, I want you to think of your culture, whatever culture you were brought up in. So for me, it was Italian, and I talk about this a lot on the podcast, how my Italian culture and heritage kind of shapes how I am as a gay man. And there are some things that are not so great that have not been useful for me, but there have been some traditions that I love and that have been very useful to me. And I think back to that story you guys told about how you didn't want to have the food at lunchtime with all the other white kids, right? Like, what's the opposite of that? So my question here is, are there any specific cultural traditions or practices from your heritage that have actually enriched or supported your experience as a gay man? And for this one, let's start with Jared.
I feel today, at this moment now, or even for the last 3, 4 years, the more I've embraced my identity, that's catapult to help things. It can be, it's like it's a plus. It's just that perspective shift of going, you know what, I'm gonna love the heck out of everything, and allow this to be okay. And more than enough, more than okay, that's being powerful. I don't know if there's anything specific that being Taiwanese, but I guess this leads on to later down the conversation, right? Is the more examples in the world that I can be for myself, like, hey, if I can love, embrace all this, it can help other people maybe who are afraid to do that, to do more of it. I can't think of anything really specific right now. Oh, actually, is one thing. I saw just the other day, so Taiwanese won RuPaul Drag Race. I don't follow it, but I was like, yes, that's awesome. So that was exciting.
I was actually just thinking that, Jared. I don't know too much about Taiwan, granted, but like after watching Drag Race, I don't know if her representation was accurate, but it was just beautiful. She did many looks that were actually, she said, were a testament to her heritage. So, all right, Alvin, how about you?
Oh God, where to start? Okay, so as a kid, the whole like rejection of my Filipino culture, like as an adult, I'd probably say in the last 5 or 6 years, I've been really adamant about like embracing my Filipino culture, particularly among my gay friends. So, I've invited a couple of, a few close gay friends to my place, and I make them Filipino food. Like it one day it would be so nice with my partner to make what we call lumpia. So lumpia is like our version of spring rolls. So you have your ground beef and you've got your chicken, you've got your carrots, and then you wrap them and then you deep fry them. Like that's something that I kind of liken to making pasta, maybe in the Italian culture, like that whole sense of like making a meal in community, whether it's with a partner, whether it's with a couple of friends. I've really embraced that part of the Filipino culture. Like in January, I had a few friends over and I made them chicken afritada, and yeah, I mean, like just sharing just sharing food that I grew up with, like home comfort food that my mom used to make when I was a kid, with people that are very near and dear to my heart, is something that's really enhanced my gay relationships as an adult.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I would love to taste all of these things. So
I know I made
put
you
me on the
salmon.
list.
I made you salmon the last time you're over. I should make you
Yeah. I'm down for the, what are they called? Limpia?
lumpia.
Lumpia.
Lumpia. Yeah.
Sounds delicious. All right, JP, how about you?
Thanks, Alvin. I think the food piece is so true. And I'll take an order of pancit, please. Thank
Yeah.
you. Uh, while we're on it, I feel like I need to add context to this conversation for my experience because the part of India that I'm from is called Goa and was a Portuguese colony. And there's a story that gets told in Goa that that state was made better by the Portuguese, and it's still told today. It's a story that says the Portuguese gave us like organization. They came in and they made the the buildings beautiful. They gave us culture and like made us more Western, so we weren't sort of these backwards Indian people almost. Um, and so I think that is the lens that I had viewed my Indian identity. And um, so when I think of this question around what was enriched, I think of sort of the unique culture that comes from Goa specifically. And listen, I'm proud to be from Goa. It's a beautiful state. I love, so much about it. But I think the story of it is about assimilation. It's about code switching so you can fit in. Um, and that was my experience when I came to Canada. I think my parents were so used to that experience of, sort of trying to be as Western as you can, that I don't think there was really an opportunity to embrace, the trueness of our culture. And I was saying to you folks before, like I just went to India a few weeks ago, and I had a really powerful experience of being in a space with predominantly South Asian people. It was all brown people, eating brown people food. And, being in this village, everyone knew my family, everyone knew the history of my family. And I started to see the power in that community. And I think that that is something that I am now learning to take away, is the power in community, that we are, as many other cultures, a community of people that are survivors, that we have worked our asses off. And, I think it's Maya Angelou that says we are our ancestors' greatest dreams. I'm seeing that now. I see what that means to exist in Canada as a South Asian man, and the history that came before it, right? I think that is something that really I am now starting to embrace and realize in a new way. Um, but I think, to go back to the question, something that I think is really a core practice is community. We always had family around. We always, every Friday night, my family would go to one of our family's houses for rice curry and fish, and it was a community practice. And that is how, we stay grounded. And I think that is something that I've carried forward, in my relationships with my friends and chosen family. So I think that's something that I would say is something I carry forward.
I love that answer. And it's such a great segue because that word community, I use the word gay community quite a bit in everything I do. And so many people have a hard time with that word because they say there's nothing about our being gay that is a community. Maybe in the past we had that when we were struggling with, our rights, HIV and AIDS and all that, and equality back in at least in the US and Canada back in the 60s and 70s. But what I hear these days is that we've lost a lot of that sense of camaraderie, connection, having each other's back, standing up for each other. I'm not sure whether that's true or not because all I know is my experience. But one of the things that I want to do with my own business, with this podcast, with the Gay Men's Brotherhood, is really start to bring back that sense of community and what that looks like now. So, great segue for our final question, which would be how can we do better as a community, as a gay community, to address these issues of intersectionality? And let's start with, Alden looks scared. Let's start with JP.
Yeah, I think it's sort of a continuation, right? I think recognizing that we're a collective, and I don't think this is specific necessarily to the queer community. I think the queer community has really embraced this idea of individualism. There's been a movement around the wellness culture that you are your own savior. And I mean, there's something between, there's a line between accountability and the duty for community to lift you up and make you whole, right? I think if we understand that we're a community, we're a collective, I think that's a great starting place because then it requires us to think of someone else first, and the experience of someone else first. And I think that's really important. It can't always be about our needs, and it can't always be about us moving ourselves forward. And I think that's really important in any type of equity work, right? Like you can't center yourself in it. You have to center someone else around you. I think of like when we're in an election time, I always say to people, like, think of the person that is most marginalized in your life, in your community, and vote for them. And I think if we were to take actions in our lives that reflect that, I think we would be a lot further along. And I also think about like, to break it down a little further, like in our South Asian community, let's be real. We've internalized so many of these stereotypes, so many of these like tropes about who we are and how we're valued, and then we play them out on each other, right? There's like this hierarchy in the community that exists that I think goes unspoken of, that we need to break down ourselves and like honor ourselves, honor each other, bring each other up, right? And I think that means we have to deconstruct our own shit, but like it's work, right? And I think, we need to be able to take a moment to step back and say, what am I bringing to the table and how is it tainting the experience of the people around me? And how do I create more opportunity for collective, more opportunity for community, more opportunity for care? And if we lead with compassion, if we lead with care, I think we'll be a lot further along. But sorry, that's a long answer, but
Yeah, that's a great answer. I'm not sure if you meant it in the same way, but when you say hierarchy, the way that I apply it in the gay community that I see is the hierarchy of whether a lot of people wouldn't even acknowledge this, but what I see is young, fit, white, masculine, I'm using air quotes, um, presenting men at the top of that hierarchy, and then everybody else, right? Is that similar to what you're talking about, JP?
yeah, absolutely. But also even between cultures and even between like within, and I'll speak to South Asian culture, within the South Asian culture community, right? It's like newcomer versus non-newcomer. It's like there's all these, I mean, there's all these little pieces that sort of factor in. And I don't know if I can break it down in a really articulate way, but it exists and it's there for us to, I mean, I think we need to shine a light on it and be more cognizant of it.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you. Jared, what are your thoughts? How can we do better as a community?
So many thoughts there, and yeah, I'm back. JP, thank you for sharing that. That's shining light for some things for me here. When I start to get into kind of the macro and all that, I can start to feel a little bit overwhelmed. I take on feelings very quickly. I'm very sensitive. Um, how I see it is the more every single one of us can learn, and obviously opportunity, it takes this privilege here, right? But the opportunity to learn to heal and to deconstruct and let go of all that for ourselves, it has a massive impact. What I mean by this, right? Let's say if I didn't do all this healing work that I've done, I would be walking out around the world like a shithead, being like, "Yeah, I'm feeling this." I'm like, I'm better, all that, all the bullshit I carry. But because I've looked within, but okay, this is not, I don't like this. I don't think this is actually serving myself or the world. Deconstruct all of those healing. The more I've done that, and even having this conversation here together, um, it shifts things. It shifts things. That's my answer there. I don't know in terms of a community, bigger scale sort of input, but from us looking within.
Thank you, Jared. Aldwin, do you feel ready to answer now?
Oh my God, I feel like it's like Miss Universe. Like I have 60 seconds to give like a Miss Universe winning answer. Okay, I do want to share a personal anecdote that JP's answer really brought to my memory. So when I first met Michael, and honestly, when I first met JP, about 10 years ago, I was playing dodgeball, gay dodgeball, and I remember that when I was playing, it was Dodgeball Monday, if I'm not mistaken. And I had made friends with, they will remain nameless, with a couple of white guys. And again, within the community, these white guys would have been perceived as like, you're very attractive, muscular, that kind of thing. And I remember I went to a tennis party one weekend, and I was with a couple of Filipino gay friends from the gay tennis community, and they had seen pictures I posted on Instagram of a Friday night, a random Friday night where I was with these other guys from dodgeball. And one of my friends said to me, he said, you really made it. You made it. And I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. He's like, you are now friends with these hot white guys. Like that's kind of that's the be all and end all if you're a gay Asian male. That's like the top prize, I guess you could say. And I remember hearing him say that and kind of sitting back, and I'm like, that's actually so gross. That's so gross. And it really opened up an internal dialogue and personal discussion around why am I seeking validation by being friends with these kinds of people? And a dialogue around, can be a very sensitive subject around like self-hatred, right? So thank you, JP, for sharing that. I think that when it comes to personal responsibility, that's something that as, gay Asian males, if that happens to be your experience, something that we all take a responsibility in, looking into for ourselves. But to answer Michael's last question about what we can do as a community to, I guess, to increase sensitivity and, inclusion, it's to offer more spaces for celebrating gay Asian men in whatever capacity that is. I mean, I was just talking to my friend Russell, who lives in Montreal. I used to be, tennis partners with him. And I was like, what was the name of that party that we used to go to in the West End? And he's like, oh, that was Yes, Yes, Y'all, which typically is like a hip hop R&B party where many people of color, Black, Asian, Latinx, come and they just grind and have a good time, and that when we have parties and spaces like that where there is truly a sense of belonging and truly a sense of visibility, then these kids that are coming up, these Southeast Asian, these gay Asian kids that are coming up and entering our community and building experience and building identity, they can find spaces where they feel validated. And I mean, that's a separate discussion. Like external validation is a separate discussion, but let's be honest, like it is a nice feeling when you are being seen for who you are. And if we can offer more spaces like that, more opportunities to be seen like that, I think that's just going to be these knees.
I love that. And for all the people who are white like me, go to those events because they're a lot of fun. attend, participate, expose yourself to different cultures, different music. Like it's such an enriching experience. And not only that, but it creates more empathy, more understanding in general. Yeah. All right, guys, we are towards the very end of our show here today. It flew by. So before I wrap up, I just want to pass it to each of you for any final thoughts or parting words you'd like to share. And let's start with JP.
I wasn't ready for that, but I'm here. I got this. I mean, final thought. First off, I'm really glad we had the conversation, right? I think it's important to be able to just say what our experience is, knowing that it's our experience is not everyone else's. I'm sure there are some folks who will have a very different experience, but I think it's important to note that we're not any one thing. And I think, you know, so many of us come to the table with so many facets of our identity that impact the way that we engage the world, see the world, experience the world. And those are just as important. And so I think we need to find an opportunity to honor ourselves in all of those spaces. I think it's a gift to be able to have these conversations. It's a gift to be able to like have other Asian folks and white folks come to the table. And Michael, you said something that really resonated with me. For those of us who sit in privilege, there is an obligation to us to show up for those who don't. And I think that that is really important. And so I think my final closing is stealing from you a little bit and saying, what is my obligation to other voices who haven't been heard, right? To the South Asian person who's a newcomer or a trans person or, you know, is of lower socioeconomic status or all of those things factor into how we come into queer spaces. And so how do I make sure that those voices are present, that spaces are created for them, that I'm creating space that welcomes them. And so, you know, as much as I want to go into a space and be welcomed, what's my duty to ensure that that is the experience for someone else?
Very well said. Thank you, JP. Jared, how about you? Any final thoughts?
If you feel you're not enough because of everything you've experienced, firstly, I'm so sorry that you have gone through what you have. I know how painful it can feel, but I want you to know that you can use those experiences as a strength. You've come so far to wherever you're at right now, you've gotten to this point in your life, and you can use that. Use that. Don't let all that stuff deter you. Those aren't weaknesses. They're not things to be ashamed of. They're things you can love and embrace.
Beautifully said. Thank you, Jared. That actually reminds me of something that Altman's been in my men's group. The very first lesson in my men's group called Shamelessly Gay Men's Group is minority stress. And what we talk about is how being a minority, take your pick of which one you want to choose from, but either way, being apart from the mainstream, the main group at a young age, we create a lot of stories about what that means. And so it's really, really important what you had said there, Jared, that for a lot of people, it could be a easy way to tell the story of I'm not enough, I'm not good enough, I'm not blah, 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 whatever your enough is. And so it's really important to do the work you can change that. You can change that story. It doesn't happen overnight, of course, but it does take time. And it helps to have these kinds of conversations. So thank you for talking about that. Aldwin, final thoughts.
Oof. I think it's safe to say that as gay men, we struggle with enoughness, right? Like we grow up and we automatically presume ourselves to not be enough because society, our families reject us for many of us. And when you cross-section that with being Asian in the gay community, it can really make you feel like you are the last spot in the survey, right? And I really love what JP said around ancestry. And it's something that I've reclaimed for myself in my 40s as a gay Filipino man. It's this idea that whenever I don't feel enough, I take a quiet moment to myself and think about the generations and generations of Filipino men and women that have struggled and you know have created my current existence, all of the hard work that they've put in. Most recently, my parents immigrating from the Philippines to North America to provide this life that I'm living. And that is really the privilege that I have today. So for any gay Asian man that has moments where they feel like they're not enough, I find that that's a good, that's something that you can reflect on, of all the generations of whatever whatever Asian ethnicity you are, of people that have struggled to get to get to where you are today. And I think that's just amazing when you really think about that, right?
Yeah. And I think that there's a lot of people out there who struggle with this not enoughness and shame, inadequacy, all the things that we want to say. And there's so many reasons for it. There's so many reasons why we can do that. But again, having these conversations, I can't stress this enough, helps. And bringing that into the light helps to remove a lot of that power around shame and that not enough story. Because when we realize, oh wait, you feel that way too, or you had that similar experience, even if it's not the same experience, what's similar is the feeling of shame, inadequacy, fear, all those things, self-doubt. We all experience it in our own way. And yes, that is unique, and maybe our story is a bit unique, sure. But the common humanity is that we feel that way. And so when we can look on the one hand, we want to, I think this is my personal opinion, we want to honor that unique story. But on the other hand, we want to find that common humanity as well. It's a delicate balance. Okay, guys, we are at time. I want to thank you. Thank you, JP. Thank you, Aldwin. Thank you, Jared. Thank you for coming on today, sharing your experiences and insights with our viewers and listeners. I know that some of them will probably want to contact you. And so I will put your info in the show notes. So for the viewers and listeners, you can contact these wonderful men there. And for those of you viewers and listeners who do want to share your own comments and share your own stories, you're welcome to do so. These episodes are on YouTube. So if you're watching us on YouTube, go ahead and leave your comments there. Tell us what your experience was like. Tell us what you think. We'd love to read your comments. And then if you're listening to us on the podcast, that's fine too. You can leave a rating and review there. In fact, your ratings and reviews do help us get into the eyes and ears of people who need us the most. And by the way, if you are on YouTube, while you're there, go ahead and subscribe and hit the bell if you haven't already. These podcasts get released every Thursday. And speaking to connection, the Gay Men's Brotherhood offers connection circles and sharing circles. There are 2 events each month, and well, I guess technically 3. And it gives you guys an opportunity to come to the table and talk about whatever we talk about here on the podcast. So if you're interested in joining those events, please make sure you're on our mailing list or join us in the Facebook community and RSVP on the events there. All right, guys, thank you so much for your time today, and we'll see you next time. Have a good one. Bye-bye.